nature of really battling for the best. Good. Okay. So I'd like to thank all the outgoing members, which I already did, so I will go right to my theme. Okay. Thank you, Frank. You've always been very helpful. So my theme, as you know, had to do with contemporary humanistic psychology. So I looked at abnormal psychology textbooks and I thought, is there anything beyond Maslow, May, and Roger? This is not a new question.
No, there isn't. So
it's not a new question. After I started working on this, I accidentally discovered, guess what? Oh, well, before I start, I forgot. Can you answer this question? When trying to seem smart, people often end up looking dumb. Which of these measures actually conveys intelligence? Mentioning Heidegger at sales meeting, eyeglasses, using big words, holding your hands on the still. This is from Wall Street Journal, by the way.
really,
Yes. Okay. So what's the correct answer?
hey,
How many for A? Ah, you all fail.
B.
B, yes. B is the correct answer. And I think there's some implication from this because I think Eric Craig just hit it on the nail during his talk. Where is he? He's gone? Okay. Well, Eric, I take it back. Okay. Now, I discovered your paper after I started to work on this, and I started to prepare something. I said, my God, whatever I do, somebody else has already done. So anyway, Scott Churchill examined 13 introduction to psychology textbooks, 1985 to 88, to assess impact of humanistic psychology on the field of psychology. Mind will unload that. Okay, what did he find? He said he was disappointed. I mean, he's been following for like since 73 onwards, actually. And he said, humanistic psychology continues to be relegated to chapters on personality and psychotherapy. Only 2 to 3 pages were devoted to humanistic, existential, and phenomenological viewpoints, which is quite alarming, considering that these texts range in size from 487 to 900 pages. What's the percentage here? Okay. He also noted humanistic psychology is associated with wizardry and generally anti-scientific attitude of the human potential movement. Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow were cited univocally as representatives of the humanistic phenomenological approach, with only occasional references to James Bugatow, Viktor Frankl, Kurt Goldstein, George Kelly, and others, and Lane. These are his work, not mine. I can't plagiarize this. I can't rephrase this, sorry. Okay. I examined, more humbly, 9 abnormal psychology textbooks. Published between 1997 to 2015, 2 of them were different editions by the same author. And I'm just going to skip through these 2 slides. These are the people that I looked at. Okay. These are the authors. Okay. All right. What are the general results? The reviewed abnormal psychology textbooks contain 15 to 18 chapters covering basic definitions, models, treatment, ethical aspects in the first few chapters, followed by chapters on disorders. That's the general pattern. My conclusion, no different from Scott Churchill. Time to go home? Yeah. So where are these concepts, our concepts, humanistic existential concepts mentioned in the textbooks? They're usually mentioned in earlier chapters on definitions and models, and then rarely mentioned in chapters on various disorders. In 4 textbooks, humanistic psychology was briefly mentioned in the discussion of anxiety, depression, stress-related disorders, substance abuse disorders. Mind you, only brief mentions, not extensive treatment. Curiously, Neved et al.'s textbook talks about positive psychology in their chapter on stress-related disorders, and I'd like to notice what they have to say. The development of this movement, positive psychology, believed that psychology should focus on positive aspects of the human experience rather than just the deficit side of the human equation, such as problems of emotional disorders, drug abuse, and violence. There is no mention of positive psychology's connection to either Maslow or humanistic psychology. Okay. The dominant views in these textbooks are biological, psychodynamic, behavioral, CBT, observational learning, and sociocultural.
That'd take a little simple. Too excited. Okay.
So these textbooks contain wonderfully beautiful diagrams on various biological, psychodynamic, cognitive, and other factors which help understand a particular disorder. But missing from these diagrams are humanistic and existential concepts. Even those books that claim to take an integrative approach do not include an emphasis on humanist, or they do not emphasize humanistic and existential psychology concepts. For these textbooks, humanistic and existential psychologists have little to say about psychological disorders, their etiology, and or their treatment. This is very disappointing. Primary references are to Carl Rogers, Maslow, as Scott noted, and to basic concepts like self-actualization, unconditional positive regard. Occasional references to others such as Frankl and Lane. There's hardly any mention of contemporary top psychologists, humanistic psychologists. And if they are cited, they serve as secondary sources for information on Rogers or Maslow's work. Okay. Interestingly, Nevitt et al.'s edition mentions links of humanistic and existential psychology with European philosophy, especially those of Martin Heidegger and Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Sartre? Sartre. Oh, good. Sounds like something else, but the above was deleted from their 2014 edition. Okay, sorry about that. But the above was deleted from the 2014 edition. So contemporary humanistic psychology is simply missing from these textbooks. Okay, what about coverage of research methods and assessment? All textbooks have chapters on research methods and assessment. In these chapters, the only qualitative method included is the case study approach. In these chapters, Kearney and Kroll, for example, have 2 paragraphs on humanistic assessment and treatment, essentially saying that humanistic theorists believe in qualitative assessment that focus on unique characteristics of an individual and often includes general questions about one's perception of the world. Humanists do not group people together to identify common characteristics and often shun formal psychological testing. So that's it. We don't have anything to say about assessment. Okay? Not surprisingly, Roger is fully recognized for his contribution and commitment to practice and research. Okay, for example, Comer, a very popular book, 2004 notes client-centered therapy was a major first alternative to psychodynamic therapy. It opened up psychotherapy to new approaches. Rogers made it possible for psychologists to practice psychotherapy, previously the exclusive territory of psychiatrists, and his commitment to clinical research helped promote the systematic study of treatment. But these textbooks also state that humanistic psychology and other phenomenological-based approaches have not fared well in research for several reasons. What are those? Anti-research attitude. I think that was duly noted by Scott too. Okay, Barlow and Durant observed in their chapter 1, the humanistic model contributed relatively new information to the field of psychopathology. One reason for this is that its proponents, with some exceptions, have little interest in doing research that would discover or create new knowledge. Interestingly, they do not mention any exceptions.
Can you believe this stuff?
Yeah, look. That's what I want to present you to.
He just got a big APF award.
Yes, there are others with awards here, as you can see, okay, what they say about us. Okay, many of these textbooks mention that humanistic and existential psychologists believe that experimental methods are unsuitable to test the effectiveness of their treatments. Research dehumanizes individuals by reducing them to test measures and scale scores. Not surprisingly then, very little control research has been devoted to the effectiveness of this approach. Okay, that is 2004 Comer. Now, Comer 2004 also notes The anti-research position is just now beginning to change. At least in the treatment realms, several recent studies have been conducted by humanistic researchers to determine whether humanistic and existential therapies are in fact of help to clients. These studies, which use appropriate control groups, okay, and statistical analysis, okay, suggest that such therapies often can be beneficial. But where are these studies? They don't cite them. Not even Kumar. Okay. Oops. So, but they do recognize humanistic psychology's influence on other approaches. Kearney and Tull note this, 2012. Humanistic psychology model is optimistic, thank you, and tied to contemporary positive psychology, which refers to the study of what factors allow people to thrive in their environment. Yes? This statement is interesting, mind you. Why? Because it links humanistic psychology to positive psychology, not the other way around. Which came first? Okay. Whitburn and Halligan textbook, 2014, includes positive psychology as part of scientific approach. They state that positive psychology benefits the field of abnormal psychology by emphasizing the potential for growth and change throughout life. The movement views psychological disorders as difficulties that inhibit the individual's ability to achieve high subjective well-being and feelings of fulfillment. Note again, no mention of positive psychology links to Maslow or humanistic psychology. Whitwell and Halligan acknowledged that this is another influence. Motivational interviewing approach was influenced by client-centered counseling, but they also state that it is more flexible. So we are weak. We are not flexible. Look at that. Okay. Then the person-centered approaches in being able to use more directive approaches.
You're flexible, Krishna.
Oh my God. Overly flexible, maybe too flexible. Okay. This is another thing that you find. Textbooks typically say humanistic psychology has important ideas, but there's always a but there. Okay. So they considered important ideas such as inherent goodness, conscious aspects of experience, free will, empathy, meaning, conditions of worth. All these have enriched psychology, but they never elaborate how these have enriched psychology. I'd like to know how. Okay, that would be a more important contribution. Now again, but, this is the but part. They also say humanistic and existential concepts are vague, mysterious, not directly observable, untestable, and thus have failed to develop as theories. You don't have any theories? Okay. All right. Now the brothers Sue, another award winner, right? Stanley Sue, another. These are the brothers Sue. Okay, 7th edition.
Let's sue him.
Yeah. Okay, this is the but idea here. The phenomenological approaches have been highly creative in describing the human condition, but less successful in constructing theory. The emphasis on subjective understanding, rather than prediction and control, on intuition and empathy. Have you guys looked at research on empathy? Rather than objective integration, and on the individual, rather than the more general category, all tend to hinder empirical study. Wow. That's why I said, have they looked at empathy, studies on empathy? Neither edition of Nevitt et al. Textbook, 2005-2014, lists humanistic therapy in their table of empirically supported therapies, but mentioned this in passing in the 2005 edition. Psychodynamic and humanistic approaches may be most effective in fostering self-growth. Thank you. Cognitive therapy has demonstrated impressive results in treating depression and anxiety disorders. Clearly, we don't treat disorders. Okay. According to the brothers Sue, I put a lot of it is quote because I don't want to take any responsibility by paraphrasing and misunderstanding them. Okay? So humanistic psychology does not work well for the seriously disturbed clients. Okay? Because Carl Rogers' person-centered counseling originated from his work with college students who were bright, articulate, psychology-minded, what some psychologists describe as worried well. And they talk about this too. Occasional, I was impressed with that word. Vagueness, humanistic, and existential thought has made applying these ideas broadly to abnormal psychology difficult. Kearney and Tall. This is, as you can see, the claim here is humanistic therapy is not singular, but part of other approaches. Okay? Kearney and Troll noted, non-directive therapies are sometimes considered to be pre-therapy, or actions taken first in treatments to develop good relationship with the client. Non-directive therapy treatments thus fit well with most other kinds of therapy. So you just, that's it. We are not singular, we are not unique. We don't have anything unique to contribute. The three brothers Sue classified humanistic psychology with psychoanalysis as insight therapies and behavioral and CBT therapies as action therapies. Well, I think this type of classification perpetrates the myth that humanistic clients do not decide on homework collaboratively with their therapists. Am I correct? They do it right? You do it right?
Of course.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Some conclusions. What are the obstacles to humanistic psychology's visibility? Okay. According to Anna Stuse, I got it from your contemporary psychology text, handbook. Skinner regarded humanistic psychology as a major obstacle to behaviorism, but I believe it is the other way around. Behaviorism and cognitive movements are a major obstacle to the visibility of humanistic and existential psychologies. Question for you. Is positive psychology becoming another obstacle to humanistic psychology? Question, because somebody told me last night they were not happy about the big debate between humanistic and psychology last night in that comedy hour. Second City?
Yes.
Yeah. As you saw earlier, some have linked humanistic psychology to positive psychology and not the other way around. Corey, a textbook writer, in his psychotherapy textbook, observed, actually cites David Kane, who reviewed his chapter on person-centered therapy, who made the following points. This is 1996. This is, according to Kane, neither he nor his colleagues have written much over 20 years. There has been little evolution of concepts or methods in person-centered therapy since the 1960s. The client-centered community has insulated themselves from and unaffected by advances in related areas. There is a strong and conservative group which preserves the traditional approach, resulting in suboptimal help to clients. And finally, the person-centered approach seems to be on the decline in the United States. These are his observations in 1996.
So he's saying that David Kane said that?
David Kane, exactly. He cited, yeah. I'm not responsible for that. Yeah, Corey is.
Yeah, I understand.
Gerald Corey, I think his name. Other conclusions. Oops, what happened here? Okay, perhaps a bigger obstacle, I think, is the hegemony of research designs based in statistics and general perception that humanistic psychologists do not use research methods and that they primarily use phenomenological methods that only yield non-objective data. That's my impression. A number of myths around humanistic and existential psychologists serve as obstacle to their visibility. Brent Robbins followed George Miller. He gave me 7 myths. These are his. 7 plus or minus 2 fits in very well. Okay, so these are the myths summarized by Brent. Humanistic psychology is hostile to religious and spiritual worldviews. People often confuse humanistic psychology and secular humanism. Okay? Myth is always false, right? So I'm not going to elaborate on that. Humanistic psychology promotes narcissism by focusing too heavily on selfism and individualism. So, do we take a lot of selfies here? Okay. Humanistic psychologists reject quantitative approaches Humanistic psychologists reject quantitative approaches to research in favor of qualitative research. Okay? Humanistic theories lack a cumulative research base. Humanistic psychotherapies lack empirical support. All this, you can see, is clearly verified in what I reviewed about the 9 abnormal psychology textbooks. Humanistic psychology is an artifact of the late 1960s countercultural movement. Humanistic psychologists hold dogmatically to the tenet that all human beings are intrinsically benevolent. Okay, so these are the 7. Last couple of slides. Some recommendation. Again, these are my recommendations, my thoughts. We need to work more aggressively to clear up the various popular myths about humanistic psychology. Okay, I don't know how, but we need to do that. We live in an assessment-based culture, and we need to say more about humanistic assessment tools and procedures. We should publish not only in specialty journals, but also in mainstream journals. We should offer workshops, publish papers with titles such as Treatment of Depression, even though I think we don't like DSM. But I think we still need to do that. Anxiety is a condition, that's a well-known condition, it's not going to go away. Depression is a well-known condition, it's not going to go away. I think we need to offer workshops and publish papers with those kinds of titles, using humanistic and existential psychology approaches. And that should be our focus. Perhaps the beauty of Carl Rogers and Maslow was their use of the language that was understood by me. I want to say not psychologists, but even I understood them very well. Humanistic psychology articles tend to be quite difficult to read, even for psychologists. So simplify language, use ordinary language. We need abnormal psychology textbook written by humanistic psychologists. I would have done that, I'm too old. And thank you very much for listening to me.